Now, what is comparative literature? As I have told that it is a new course, and for this reason, we will be trying to understand the course from the very initial stage of this course. And what I was talking that comparative literature involves the study of text across cultures. Very broadly speaking, because culture involves different language, different behavioral patterns, and everything. And for this reason, comparative literature will be studying the two different culture, language, etc. And in that regard, we come in that definition that comparative literature is interdisciplinary. So we will be discussing a thing taken from one discipline to another discipline. And another thing that one of you have mentioned, that it will get the connection, it will try to have the connection of two literary pitch. And what would be the connection? Connection that means literature may be written in one time and in the same language and in the same culture. Another literature will be written later on. So two kinds of literature can be compared, two kinds of culture can be compared, as well as two kinds of literature of two different time. One kind of literature of two different time can also be compared in comparative literature. And it means if we elaborate these issues and the concept that two literary pieces of two languages as well as cultures can be compared. And again, two literary pieces of one language but produced in different times, that can also be compared in comparative literature. And places. And suppose Bengali literature can be produced in one portion of Bangladesh, and another literature that would be produced in another portion of our country. So the literature produced in a same country in two different times and two different places, that can also be compared in comparative literature. What would be compared in comparative literature? That we can go on. That is, of course, the structure, patterns, as well as the sort of thing which is noticeable and researchable in two pieces of literary text can be compared in comparative literature. So structure, pattern, narrative techniques, as well as what we notice, something we can notice easily and something we can research on the writings. So these aspects will be comparing in comparative literature. Again, if we discuss the thing that researcher may find the similarities between two texts. As we have seen the name of two texts, that is The Tempest, written by William Shakespeare, and Our Tempest, written by M.E. Sejour. So the similarities in their name. Okay, so they will be finding the concern that they are similar in name, a little bit different, but what would be the other similarities we can find in those texts? And also similarities of two authors from the different linguistics background, different cultural background, and different contextual background. So the authors and text, similarities and dissimilarities, which are researchable, which are readable, which are noticeable in two texts, can be compared in comparative literature. In this regard, Matthew Arnold, in his inaugural lecture at Oxford in 1857, he has said that, okay, so what is the importance of comparing literatures? Why will we compare the literature? Literature itself is a literature. Literature itself is a presentation of humanity, culture, and everything. So why will be comparing? So Matthew Arnold's comment in this regard is praiseworthy. He has said that everywhere there is a connection, everywhere there is an illustration. No single event, no single literature is adequately comprehended except in relation to other events, to other literature. Just we can talk about the structuralism. There is a concept of binary opposition. Okay, that is, you know, that what is binary opposition. Binary opposition, that means we can understand the positive thing if we put that thing too close to a negative thing. We can understand the appearance of day to the opposite thing, night, white and black. So these are the two concepts. So in the concept of structuralism, it is called the binary opposition. Here, quite similar attitude has expressed by Matthew Arnold. He says that every single literature or literary piece, there is a connection. And when we will be finding, when we will be researching such kind of connection in literature, that would be praiseworthy, and that is the easy way, and that would be the appropriate way of understanding or apprehending a literary piece. That is the importance of comparative literature. According to Matthew Arnold, he has said this speech in an inaugural speech at Oxford in 1857. Let's move on. Again, it means that our understanding and reading will be appropriate when we'll be comparing Chaucer with Boccaccio, you know, the two important writers. So how and which portion are similar and which attitude are unfamiliar in these two writings, Chaucer and Boccaccio. Again, if we study the William Shakespeare's drama, we will be getting the information that in which way William Shakespeare collected the source. Okay, so if we see that in many of his plays, many of Shakespeare's plays, he has collected his materials from Latin, French, Spanish, and the Italian folktales and cultures, as well as. And so that means when we will be understanding the William Shakespeare's literary works sources, our understanding would be good and also praiseworthy. And that is the thing that is done in comparative literature. And it is done in support of Matthew Arnold's comment that Matthew Arnold pinpointed that issue that a single literature will have a connection with other literature. And we can find it easily when we will be in the stage of comparing two writers or two literary pieces. Again, we can compare Baudelaire with Edgar Allan Poe. So in case of poetry, we can also, again, we can compare that many English novelists. So we may ask the question, only the poetry and the drama will be compared? No, English novelists can be compared with the 19th century Russian writers in translation, of course, translation. Again, that idea would be clear next time. That means comparative literature is now connected with some other subgenre. I would say subgenre at the initial stage, because next time translation studies become another individual discipline. So English novelists were influenced by the Russian novelist or the Russian tales. Of course, the Russian novelists, they will be writing their writings in Russian language, of course, in translation. But translation and in or the translation in English or writing in Russian language is a linkage. We will have a linkage between English novelist and the Russian novelist as well. And if we move forward, we will have another scenario, that is James Joyce borrowed from and loaned to Italo Svevo. It's a quite new writer to me. Okay, so James Joyce borrowed his source or narrative techniques or some things from Italo Svevo. And again, Clarice Lispector remind us of Jane Rice. Alternatively, Jane Rice recalls Dizuna Barnes and Anais Nin. So these are the list that we can compare. It means that, of course, there is a connection, and when we will be understanding the connection in literature, that would be helpful for us to understand the literature well. And that is the thing comparative literature does. Matthew Arnold's view is justified in this regard. That is, everywhere there is a connection. And one poet is influenced by others, as well as the novelist is influenced by the novelist or the writers or the source of the other countries. So this is common. So we may ask the question, what is the benefit of understanding such kind of linkage? Yes, if you understand the linkage, then that would be easy for us, for the reader, and also for the researcher to understand the literary piece well. That would be helpful for art and also helpful for humanity. That explanation will be coming later on. It proves that literature or writings in isolation can never be evaluated or justified properly if we take Matthew Arnold's comment granted. Thus, when reader move on to his or her writings, association, connections are the common phenomena within a single literature or writing. In this way, a single piece of writing is a part of literature, what Goethe termed at wealth literata. Okay, wealth literata. So this is the Goethe's term. So when we will be finding the connection, then we can put this comment that every literature is in any way connected to world literature, that termed by Goethe. And for this reason, Goethe encourages to keep informed about foreign production. He has said, why? Because every single literature is a part of world literature, according to Goethe. In this connection, Goethe's comment is highly appreciable, that poetry is the common property of all mankind. Okay, so Goethe also put another comment that a literary piece, poetry, is not a property of a country, not a property of a nation, either it is a property of all mankind. So everyone can read and understand poetry of any language, of any culture, of any ethnic background. That is vehemently commented by Goethe in his writings. So, getting such kind of information, we can assume the definition of comparative literature. That is, comparative literature is an inevitable stage in reading. So when we will be reading a literature, of course, if we compare, if we context, if we try to understand the contextual understanding of our text, that would be easy. So comparing literature is an stage of reading, which can be made easier by the international marketing of books and by the availabilities of the translation. Of course, the literature we want to compare, we should have the translation available so that we can easily compare one literature with other literature. So comparative literature is an inevitable stage of reading when we can put a writing in the international arena, and vice versa. Other person or other poet can put his or her writings in an international arena. For poetry or literary speech is a part of world literature, and it is a property of all human beings of this world. But the critics are not happy with such kind of initiation or the initial stage of comparative literature. So they come up the critics against comparative literature, they come up with some question, the critical question. So what are the object of study in comparative literature? How can comparison be the object of anything? Comparison, easily we can compare anything. We can compare a pen with a book. We can compare nothing else. So this comparison can be a subject. The critic can't understand such kind of comparison will be a subject of discipline. If individual literature have a canon, what might be a comparative canon be? Okay, sometimes we say that it is a canonian text of William Shakespeare. It is a canonian text of George Bernard Shaw. So in that case, comparison, what kind of canon comparison comparative literature will be, or comparative canon will be? In which way, in which weapon, in which motive we will be comparing the literature? That question is also done by the critic. And how does the comparatist select what to compare? Okay, so what is the object? The comparatist. Comparatist, that means a person or a reader who will be comparing two literary pieces. He or she is called comparatist. So how does the comparatist select what to compare? This question was placed by the critics. And is comparative literature a discipline? That means a subject or a special or the definite literary study or literary subject, or is it simply a field of study? So field of study, that means it is a part of subject. So such kind of question is are put by the critic. They are not ready to accept comparative literature as an individual discipline or subject. They want to say that comparison is a very minor issue, and that comparison cannot be a subject or cannot be a discipline. And if comparative literature becomes a discipline, let me understand what should be the object of comparison and how a comparatist will be selecting his topic of comparison. They put such kind of question. In 1950 decades, René Wallach termed this question as a crisis of comparative literature. Okay, so as we are also concerned about the history of comparative literature, René Wallach, he in 1950 decades, he has put this question as the crisis of comparative literature. How we will be coping the answer of this question? Will we have the answer of this question? So René Wallach said that comparative literature arises strong passion and enthusiasm in one hand, and on the other hand, comparative literature invites strong criticism against itself. So in one hand, many readers, researchers loved comparative literature in 1950 decades, up to 1950 decades. At the same time, we see that many critics vehemently criticize comparative literature, that it cannot be a discipline. Comparative literature and comparison cannot be a thing that is relating to research or reading a literary text. If we go back earlier, that is 1903, Benedetto Croce argued that comparative literature is a non-subject and dismissed vehemently that comparative literature might be considered as a separate discipline. So Croce is not ready to accept comparative literature as a separate subject of discipline. So he said that it should be the study. Croce defines comparative literature as, according to Benedetto Croce, comparative literature is the exploration of the vicissitudes, alterations, developments, and reciprocal differences of themes and literary ideas across literature. Okay, so here he said that, yeah, what does a comparative literature do? Comparative literature will be understanding the alternation, the vicissitudes, the developments, and the reciprocal difference of theme and the literary ideas across literature. It is done by Croce. So Croce suggested that comparative literature can be called the study of literary history. So as you see that we will be comparing language, we will be comparing cultures, we will be comparing the other parts or other patterns of literature that can easily be called as the literary history. So it cannot be called the literature or the comparative literature. So Cross said that comparative literature can be called literary history instead of calling it a separate discipline. And Cross very fantastically quote another co-founder, another researcher. His name is Max Koch, founder and editor of the two German comparative journals. Their name is very tough to pronounce in German language. One was published from 1887 to 1910, and another one 1901 to 9. So quoting Max Koch, Cross claimed that Max Koch didn't distinguish between literary history and comparative history. Okay, so Max Koch had been publishing two journals relating to comparative literature, and Cross claimed that Max Koch didn't differentiate literary history and comparative history. So, in other words, Cross wanted to say that Max Koch put some argument that can be easily done in literary history. So Cross claimed that comparative literature has no substance to it. Okay. Again, one of the founder of North American comparative literature, Charles Mills Galley, answers Cross claim in the following manner. According to Charles Mills Galley, literature is a distinct and integral medium of thought and a common institutional expression of humanity, which is differentiated by social condition of the individual, by racial, historical, cultural, linguistic influences, opportunities, and restrictions, but irrespective of age, promoted by common needs and aspirations of man, sprang from common faculties, psychological, physiological, obeying common laws of materials made of the individual and the social humanity. So Charles Mills Galley answered all the questions. So we have seen 6 questions earlier, that is several critique done against comparative literature, and especially the Cross claim that been answered very properly by Charles Mills Galley. Whereas Charles Cross termed limited comparative literature in comparative history only. So Cross wanted to say that comparative literature can only be termed as the comparative history. There, Charles Mills Galley adds several issues that what should be the subject of comparative literature. So here we see that individual and social condition. So if in a literary piece we can see individual position and as well as a social condition, that can be compared. Also the racial condition, also the cultural condition, also the linguistics perspectives, one in translation and another in original. Different age group, also we can understand that William Lord of the Flies, there we see that the boys, the English boys are doing something in the forest. So different age group we can study, and psychological as well as physiological aspects with comparative literature. So many things are included in comparative literature according to Charles Mills Galley. However, Charles Mills Galley. So Charles Mills Galley put so many subjects that are included in comparative literature. In 1974, quite similar sentiment were expressed by Francois Jost, another critic, in 1974. He said that national literature cannot constitute an intelligible field of study because of its arbitrarily limited perspectives. So if we study, so Frost just has come out another perspectives. Okay, that is, if we want to judge a national literature in one perspectives, that means the national perspectives is the personal perspectives. So when personal perspectives, that perspectives is very much arbitrarily put. This is the comment done by Jost in 1974 when comparative literature was in the apex of the field of study. So these are the scenario. Whereas comparative literature represents more than an academic discipline. So previously it was in a position of whether comparative literature will be calling a discipline or not, but just said that it is the more than a discipline. It is an overall view of literature, of the world of letters, a humanistic ecology, ecological balance. We know that in case of the social society, in case of nature, we see the ecological balance. So in this field, that Jost claimed that comparative literature is a humanistic ecology, a literary philosophy or the view of life, and a vision of the cultural universe, and the exclusive and comprehensive. So many fields and so many important things can be done if we compare national literature with other literature. National literature with world literature, as Goethe comment earlier. So for Jost, like Gale proposes that comparative literature is a kind of world religion. Okay, world religion, that means the religion that will be covering the all beliefs and notions of every religion of the world. In such a way, comparative literature is a field or a study or a discipline, field of study or a discipline that cover the most of the individuals and the social perspectives, that is social language, social culture, social behavior, the pattern, psychological pattern, the physiological pattern, everything can be included in comparative literature. And for this reason, Jost says that comparative literature can be called a kind of world religion. It means that when a reader reads a great work, all cultural differences disappear. Okay, why? Just said it. That means you will be reading a French text. I will be reading a Russian text. So when I will be reading that text, I will be involving the text so quickly and so easily that I will be understanding. I will not be understanding the cultural difference. So no cultural difference are there when a reader will be reading a text. So a text itself a text. And for this reason, we can repeat that Goethe's comment that poetry is a phenomena or a property of all humankind. And that is good. And art is seen as an instrumental of universal harmony. Art, that means the literary speech or writing, art, poetry, something else. So these are the universal harmony can be established by reading or consulting, and very frankly, by comparing literature of several linguistics and ethnic background. And comparatist is one who facilitates the spread of that harmony. So art is an instrumental of universal harmony, and comparatist, that means a person who will be comparing two texts of two ethnic or linguistics background or two cultural background. He will be a helping hand to spread that universal harmony. So that is the thing done by comparative literature. So comparatists must possess special skill, and for this reason, what does a comparatist do? Comparatist will be upgraded person with some skills. What are the skills? Wellek and Warren in their book, that is Theory of Literature, a book that was enormously significant in comparative literature when it was first appeared in 1949, suggests that what should be the skill of comparatist. Comparative literature will make high demands on the linguistics proficiency of our scholar. So first, that means the comparatist who will be reading comparative literature or who will be researching comparative literature, he or she should have the high proficiency in language, number one. And it asks for a widening of perspectives. Okay. হাজার বছর ধরে আমি হাঁটিতেছি পৃথিবীর পথে. Michael Madhusudan Dr. has said that it is possible that a person will be walking for 1,000 years. It is not possible, but it is possible by when the psychology will be involved in writings. So akasher upore akash, batasher upore batash. So akasher upore akash, we can get some astrological knowledge, and at the same time batasher upore batash, what does it mean? That means the poet will have some upgraded and the widened version of perspectives. In the same way, comparatist, they should have a widened perspectives. What a general person will see a comparatist will be seeing a more elaborated or evaluated perspectives of a thing. And if it is so, he or she can be the comparatist. A suppression of local and provincial sentiment. Another thing, that is, if that is the from the theory, that there is a theory that is called Juavinism. That means that excessive patriotism. So if a person loves his or her country very much, and what does it mean? It does mean that a Juavinist person will not admit the existence of other nationalist approach. In the same way, a comparatist should overcome the nationalistic attitude. That means a comparatist should have the mentality to accept the world literature, accept the literature of other languages and cultural background. And such a skill, according to Wellek and Lenin, said that should be of a comparatist, and these skills are not easy to achieve. That is, what is the skill? Number one, the widening linguistic proficiency, widening perspectives, and also he or she should suppress the local and the provincial sentiment. That means our comparatist should have broader perspectives, worldwide perspectives, universal perspectives to understand, to observe writing. That is the activity done by a comparative. So gradually we are getting the answer of the 6th question that was imposed earlier. What does the comparatist do? What will be the field of study of comparative literature? Everything can be answered in such a way by several scholars through the passage of time. The comparatists have depicted someone with a vocation as a kind of international ambassador. Wow. So it is not an action, it is a vocation. Naturally, vocation, what we do for our mental happiness. Naturally, if we do a job, that is we are getting salary for this. It is a job. But when we will be doing something without any interest, only for the interest of knowledge, only for the interest of enthusiasm, that is called vocation. So a comparatist will be doing something, will be reading a world literature for the cause of vocation. He or she will have the enthusiasm or understanding that he should read the world literature to understand the other things that are researchable or readable in several literature through the passage of centuries, through the passage of decades, everything. And he will be an international ambassador. Ambassador, a personal ambassador will be representing a one country, but a comparatist will be an ambassador. What is happening all over the world literature? What is happening in the North American literature? What is happening in the African literature? What is happening in the Chinese and the Japanese literature? Everything will be coming out when you will be sharpening in the world of literature. And for this reason, it went up to the apex of the Western graduate in 1960s and 70s decades. Let's see that will be coming. So working in the comparative literature in the United Nations. So universal international ambassador, what will be his post? So Bangladeshi ambassador will be posting in a country. But when there will be international ambassador, he will be working in United Nations. United Nations for what? United Nations for world literature. So that is the elevated field a comparatist can achieve if he or she works in comparison. That was claimed by a critic that comparative literature, it's simply a history, literary history. Wellek and Warren state that literature is one. Sorry. And art and humanity are one. So two different things. Literature is one, and art and humanity are one. So art and humanity run side by side. We can aloof humanity from art, and we can aloof humanity from art, and vice versa. So these are the situations. So and for this reason, literature all over the world is a great body. So a literature of Bangladesh, literature of French, Russian, and Germany, as a whole, it is one. And the same way, art and humanity run side by side. And Goethe confidently assert in 1827 that national literature means little now. Though his comment next time was proved wrong, that is itself national literature will be meaning high. But for comparing a literature, Goethe commented this comment that national literature, if we confine ourselves in our national literature only, that attitude Goethe called that it is a narrow escape, that if we stay in a small field or the national field of literature only. So we have a vast field of literature. If you are happy, if you have a happy feeling that yes, we are enriched with so many literature, we will not be looking at other literature. That concept Goethe vehemently commented that that is a very little now national concept of some nations' literature. Again, Wellek offered the cultural equivalent of the movements towards the United Nations Assembly that was felt powerfully after Second World War. So, yeah, in Wellek also said that after the Second World War, that cultural equivalent, because there was a criticism before First World War that high culture, low culture, standard culture, weak culture, several cultural difference. But after the Second World War, that was the difference between culture getting less appreciation here. A decade later, theory of literature appeared, and thus comparative literature was gaining ground in 1960 and 1970 decades. Okay, so in 1960 and the 1970 decades, comparative literature got the firm ground, having so many criticism, and that criticism was answered by several critics like Jost and Mill Galloway, and also Goethe, Matthew Arnold, like that. The great wave of critical thought of comparative literature moved forward through one after another, that is from structuralism to post-structuralism, from feminism to deconstruction, from semiology to psychoanalysis. So the literature, comparative literature, moves on to so many fields of literary theories and perspectives. Next time, attention shifted from comparative literature to the role of reader. Actually, as I have said, that when a new notion or the discipline come in existence, the previous notion gets less importance. As we see in literary history, we observe that each new discipline or subject broke over the previous one. And in 1950s and the early 1960s, Western graduate students turned to comparative literature as a radical subject. So in 1950s and the early 60s, we see that the Western graduate students, they were trying to study comparative literature because it was in its supreme or the apex position that if we study comparative literature, we will be achieving the world knowledge of the world culture, world language, world literature, and something else. So that was the highly appreciable time of comparative literature. It was caused so because of the time of the transgressiveness and the everyone moved to do across the boundaries of a single literature study. So it was done so because everyone was trying to get the upgrade movement. Upgrade movement, as you know, in case of modernism, that means everything will be moving forward, upgraded movement. That attitude dominates the graduates in 1960s and the 1970s decades. And for this reason, everyone was trying to overcome the boundary of their nation in terms of literary pitch. And that was the position of comparative literature. That means a very good and healthy position in 1960s and the 1970s and 1950s decades. In 1969, Harry Levin complained not to be agonized about the theory of comparative literature, but to do more practical work. So Harry Levin comes up with another idea. So okay, we have passed so many times consulting the theory of comparative literature. Let's do some practical work. He has come up with some idea, and Levin's proposal proved failed when new generation of Western graduate moved to literary theory. So after 1970 decades, so Levin put his comment in 1969, that is 70 decades. So after 1970 decades, the student moves to other field of literary discipline or literary subject. What are that is the literary theory, women's studies, semiotics, film and media studies, and cultural studies, like that. So from comparative literature, as we say that through the passage of time, everyone is interested to do something else. So through the passage of time, after 1970 decades, this field of study gained prominence to the Western literature. But matter is that though comparative literature was underway in the West after 1970 decades, it began to gain ground in the rest of the world. For example, comparative literature began to emerge in China, Taiwan, Japan, and other Asian countries. Why? Because these countries especially focused on the evaluation of national literature through the opportunity of comparative literature. So China, Japan, other Asian countries, they had been observing the activities done by the Western comparative literature. And then these countries, China, Japan, Taiwan, and other Asian countries, they got an opportunity to expand their national literature. In which way? They will be putting their national literature and they will be understanding their literary position, comparing to their national literature to other literature. So that opportunity was very frankly and very confidently accepted by the countries like China, Taiwan, Japan, and other Asian countries. So in Western countries, comparative literature was getting less importance. But in other parts of the world, comparative literature was getting firm ground. Especially here we see that Shapon Mojumdar puts that in spite of the deploration of the Anglo-American critic as the methodology, comparative literature has struck roots in the third world nation and in India in particular. So Shapon Mojumdar put that yes, comparative literature especially started a firm ground in India and other countries. He has put. And Ganesh Devi goes further and he said that comparative literature in India is directly linked to the rise of the modern Indian nationalism. Noting that comparative literature has been used to assert the national cultural identity. So what we see that in case of comparative literature, so many subfields are included. And for this reason, the comparative literature was a helpful hand in upgrading the national literature and upgrading the national culture and upgrading the national and cultural identity. And for this reason, comparative literature is a very good subject in all, and the students all over the world are doing research and reading in comparative literature. Hopefully, I have explained a bit in this first portion of this today's class, and we will be discussing more on comparative literature in the next class. Okay, so until then, Allah Hafiz.
Sir,